This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to From Guilt to Good, Self-Care Solutions for Busy Caregivers, the podcast rewriting the narrative of self-care. If you're a caregiver feeling stretched thin, torn between responsibilities and longing for self-care, then you're in the right place. I'm Jeanette Yates, fellow caregiver and someone who spent years doing all the self-care things and never really feeling any better. After years of research, self-exploration, and trial and error, I finally found a way to create a sustainable self-care practice that made me feel good, not guilty. And then From Guilt to Good, we'll explore how you can do that too. Together, we'll hear expert insights, actionable steps, and heartfelt stories to guide you toward rediscovering your worth, reclaiming your health, and getting back the life you've been too busy to enjoy. So today's episode is going to actually be the second part of my interview with Chris Carberg. So last week's episode was the first part. And so if you haven't heard that, I will link it in the show notes for you. But Chris is a passionate digital media founder. He founded postpartumdepression.org and now is the founder and CEO of Addiction Help. And in this part of the interview, we are going to be talking specifically about actionable steps and strategies for caregivers who are either in the middle of their own recovery, or maybe they've been in recovery for a while, but they find themselves in a caregiving situation that sometimes makes recovery a little bit harder than they're used to. He's going to talk about the resources, a little bit about addictionhelp.com, and some of the practical strategies that he's used as a caregiver in recovery as well. So I hope you enjoy the second part of my interview with Chris Carberg. If you're an overwhelmed caregiver that longs for some of your life back, craves time for self-care, freedom from the isolation of caregiving and the guilt, then the Empowered Self-Caregiver cohort is for you. Within the Empowered Self-Caregiver cohort, we'll take a deeper look into your unique caregiving challenges, assess your current self-care practices, and explore a personalized plan where you feel your self-care focus is most necessary. You'll design a self-care practice that is flexible enough for your life and something that you're going to actually enjoy. Erase your guilt, embrace a sense of worthiness and empowerment, and create an unshakable support system to avoid a lonely caregiving journey. In the Empowered Self-Caregiver cohort, I share the very steps I took to break the burnout cycle of self-care. As someone who has been a caregiver for over 2 decades, I know what it's like and I know what it takes to finally find balance, and my care framework inside the cohort teaches you to find that balance too. If you're interested in learning more about the Self-Caregiver cohort, please go to theselfcaregiver.com or check the show description for details. One of the things that I want to make sure that we talk about is your work with addictionhelp.com, and also some of the things that you think are helpful when someone is in recovery and they find themselves in a caregiving position. Sometimes it happens, like in my situation, I've been doing this for a long time. Other times it's a phone call, a diagnosis, an emergency. But either way, you know, for our fellow recovering people, what are some things that we can give them, some tools that we can give them, or some insights that we can give them to help them during the, because it's going to happen where that, you know, relapse isn't necessarily going to happen, but those thoughts, those feelings, that helplessness and hopelessness comes to every caregiver, I think, at some point.
It does. It does. Yeah.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about addictionhelp.com.
No, I think that the first thing is, I always say finding co-laborers, people who understand your situation. In my case, I had a couple very close friends, who were in recovery, who were in my world, and who I was speaking to on a regular basis, discussing decision making, and then we were checking in daily.
Yes.
So that the number one thing I think, and I would say it applies to this, of course it applies to more, is, being alone, going from totally consumed with someone to being totally alone. If you are battling, or if you've battled addiction, I just think you're putting yourself at risk. And so I tend to think of it more like on a spectrum of like, I will definitely need time alone, but I try to do it more like a dimmer switch. And I would go to like Publix, or like to some place public that wasn't necessarily where I had to be on with people, but they were around. And it was like almost like slowly turning the volume down to kind of like, okay, well, look, there's real life. One thing my dad always said, like, the world keeps turning. Chris, someday I'm going to die. And no, the world's going to keep turning, and you got to be okay with that. And so I think the first thing was, when you're in the caregiving situation, right, no different than any chaotic situation, it is all consuming, and you feel like that's the only singular reality. So number one is, I think, finding co-laborers, people who you can share your frustrations with, who are not going to judge you, who care about you, and are holding you accountable. The second thing is to widen the context of exactly what it is you're dealing with by seeing other people living, and I would say even more so in some cases than even me living. Sometimes I needed to see others going about their business, going about their lives, and just kind of witness it and say, okay, this is outside of my caregiving experience right now, what I'm doing. But look, okay, there is life continuing to go on. And so I think when we are at our greatest risk of relapse, slip, any kind of trip up on something as part of our recovery, is when we're isolated and we're listening to like lies in our head.
I was going to say just our brains.
Completely right. Yeah. We're so great. We can solve everyone else's problem. We just can't solve our own. It's like, but I think that's what I always try to focus on with. And also I kind of mentioned, I had shared, like, I did some thinking about it after the fact, and I kind of broke some of it down to, what I had done was notice that I started with adrenaline.
Yes.
I dealt with frustration. That was kind of when the adrenaline had to like push against things. Then came a first exhaustion. Now in between these things that I would have to, again, you need to keep refilling. So I do think spending time with my wife and daughter, like, I wasn't able to fully separate from what I was doing at the time entirely, but being present in someone else's happenings again, I do think really can help you to not view your situation as like, it's just you against the world, Right. And then I dealt with, with grief and then with healing after the fact, but it was, I'm such a believer that, problem shared is a problem cut in half. And, I don't dump that on just anybody. I have people around me who will have volunteered to be that. Yeah. And I know I'm that for people. And they will always say, and I'm sure this is not new to you, is like, I'm sorry to bother you, but that entry line of like, the only thing you can do to bother me is not reach out.
Right.
Like that's the closest you can get to bothering me. I think that again, solitude is good for those things, but we gotta remember like that we're not alone. Life is going on. There is life after challenges. And so I've been in the digital space for, since about 2007, I guess, was when I made my first website and stuff. And, I've just always been passionate about the web in terms of its ability for communications. And, I had launched a number of sites that were in, cancer care and different things that I had done with various projects. But my passion was addiction recovery. And then, my wife got sick when she had postpartum depression. I was like, well, I don't know how to cope with this. So I found who owned that domain. I'm like, can I buy you out and make a site? And we've had probably about almost 1 million users since that launch. And then addiction
just shows
help.
you how many people are searching,
There are so many. We get, one thing is we get a lot of letters from people on the site, and we respond to every one of them. And, we've had hundreds of them, of people who reach out from every walk of life. And it really does, it gives you a sense of like, you're definitely not alone when you're going through one of these things. And then the addiction side, addiction help, addictionhelp.com, is we're building it as a platform for people who are actively seeking help right now, but also for those in recovery. Those are people a lot of times who are left behind by these web properties, because the web properties that do exist, they just want to try and sell your information a lot of times just to get you, it's not really, it's not for long-term recovery advocates. So we're trying to do that. We're also just, we're building out, hundreds of pages of content with our medical team and just trying to build it into a content platform that feeds both people who are seeking help, who have had help and want to stay healthy, and also to push the addiction and recovery industry to be better.
Right.
So we can use the power of kind of like the light of day of the internet to force people into like, it's a loving headlock, to the industry to say like, get your act together, because, there's eyes on you now.
Well, and there's so many resources on the site for all different stages of recovery and types of recovery. I know primarily it's primarily substance abuse and alcohol.
Yeah. So we started with the substance abuse side, and then we've moved very, very fast into the behavioral health side, and into the broader mental health issues, just because, things have changed dramatically in terms of our understanding of the likelihood of co-occurring disorders is through the roof. Yeah. If people ask us like, so what are people searching for the most? I can tell you the pages where people are searching the most for help, that we're seeing a huge spike in is gambling and porn use and compulsive porn use. Yeah. And it is so I think that kind of behavioral stuff is going to outpace substance use disorders in the next 5 years. That is my belief. Just with sports betting, I think we're in a dangerous kind of spot. So the idea is to get ahead of all this stuff, to have a resource. I don't remember 2005. Tomorrow in 2005 was the day my mom got a call from Officer Vance Voiles, great name, and that her son had been found, and it was pretty much overdosed and was taken to the hospital, and severe. I was Baker acted tomorrow, but 18 or 19 years ago. And I look back at it, and they had nowhere to turn at the time. They were looking online. Of course, like anywhere, there were people on there who were just trying to cheat and just get people to a center. And I actually went to one place first, and my dad was in there with me. He's like, I don't feel good about this. We need to go. Yeah. And so I think that the idea is, we want to work with treatment centers, individual practitioners to give people really a sense of who they can trust, which is really the one thing that I found that you can't currently access on the web, because it's missing that insight from others who are kind of telling you that you can trust these people and here's why and stuff like that. So it's a lot going on. We launched our third third video kind of podcast
I was
on
going to
our
say
channel.
the podcasts are really good.
Yeah, they're really coming along, and but yeah, no, I think that I love the fact that you share. I mean, you share so openly, and like we said, we're both kind of open books about a lot of stuff, but I do think we're reaching a point now where people are far more likely and more willing to share their struggle during it than ever before. It's almost like something has changed, I feel like.
Well, I think, one of the things that I'm hoping, most people, some people in recovery, they just want to do their recovery and kind of have it just be not something. And then there's people like you and I that are like, ding, 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 ding.
Right.
Like, talk about it.
Yeah.
And, I think that for those of us who do have the capacity to be able to share our stories. And, for me as now in this space of caregiving, but also knowing, man, there's got to be people that are dealing with various types of recovery that are also trying to navigate their own sobriety while also caring for their loved ones that may or may not have been part of their addiction story or trauma story. And I know that there is research out there now about, which we won't have time to talk. I'll have to have you on the podcast again to talk about that other, where there are caregivers taking care of people who are elderly. Yeah. And also dealing with their own addiction issues. And so
for sure,
there's that whole thing too. So I just want to, for anybody, any caregiver out there that is listening and saying to yourself, oh, I've got my sobriety on lock, but, maybe you're like, oh no, maybe this conversation has made you think like, now that you mention it, there are some things that are red flags. Then please go to addictionhelp.com. My friend Chris and the whole team over there. I highly recommend the site. It's very good. I have been on there many times. Like I said, even though my issues and the reason I'm in recovery is totally different, the steps of recovery are the same. And
for sure. Yeah, for sure.
That's one of the principles are the same.
It's very unifying. And I just wanted to mention one last thing. And, I didn't think about this either, but, my mom was a caregiver for me when I got sober. And so I feel like I should mention, if you're a parent who is, who has a child who's battling addiction, my mom went with me to my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and, she was willing to go places with me that I didn't know anyone would ever go with me. Was willing to learn to trust me again. And so that is another part of this journey, is learning to rebuild relationships. But that's a whole other type of caregiver that I didn't even kind of think of, but just thinking of Mom and what she did with and for me. There's a lot that can happen for a parent, that you can do to be a part of the recovery process. And definitely don't feel like they have to go and do it themselves. Sometimes they just need someone to go with them, talk to them about it. And people are very welcoming at meetings and groups and things like that for parents who will go with someone.
Well, Chris, I feel like I could have you on like for a episode every month or so, just to talk about different aspects of recovery, caregiving, and care receiving. I think that's another thing that I'm looking into a lot now too, is like, as a caregiver, it's really hard to receive care too. For sure. So that's a whole other thing.
No, that's so true.
Thank you for joining me today. From Guilt to Good Podcast is a proud member of the Whole Care Podcast Network. To access additional self-care resources that help you feel good, not guilty, check out the show notes or head to theselfcaregiver.com. You can also check out the description if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe now and join me in going from guilt to good as you rediscover your worth, reclaim your health, and get back the life you've been too busy to enjoy. And if you've enjoyed this show, please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback matters. We're redefining self-care for caregivers one episode at a time. And until next time, remember, you are worthy of the same care you give others.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.